This is Wandering North America. My name is Jeff, and I'm glad you're here. This episode, we're talking to Les Mironuck. Les is kind of an unusual background. He is by birth American and Canadian, having grown up in Canada and then moved to America in the 1980s. Welcome, Les.
Thank you.
So what drove you to get into history?
Well, I've always enjoyed history and biographies, so read a lot of them, and born and raised in Canada, so I got the British version of U.S. history, and it's quite a bit different than the U.S. version of U.S. history. Mm-hmm. And so when I moved down to the United States in 1986, I would have conversations with people and found out that there was a large disconnect. What they were talking about, I didn't know anything about, and vice versa. So I started doing a lot of research and wanted to go back and find and do reading in books that were not revised history. So nothing modern, nothing in the last 60, 70 years. So these are all older books, preferably 100, 150 years old, some as old as 200 years old. So written at a time when the books could have been challenged by the subjects themselves, or at least people that knew the subjects. So, I then found out that a lot of the history had been revised for many, many, many years. So I sought out to rewrite the books that are actually the history that happened, not what they hope happened or wish happened. It's actually what happened.
Okay, so you're going back to 200-year-old period books.
Yeah, books that were written in the mid-1780s, 1790s. I've got books that were written in 1840, like that. And
so your goal is to find a book from that period. How do you find out a specific book exists?
Well, part of it is just research. You're going to find a book that has an index, bibliography, and so say an author that wrote a book in 1950. He's going to have a bibliography that shows a book that he used that was 50 years before that. So you can find an author and a title, and then once you find that book, you can trace even further back. Eventually, you can get right back to the books that nobody even knows exist any longer.
At some point, you have in your hand a book written in 1800 or 1780. 1807, George Washington.
Yeah, his first biography.
His first biography. Words have a tendency to change meaning over time.
Yes.
Did that cause you much trouble?
This book and several others that I have is written early English, so you need to have an Oxford dictionary because we didn't have our first American dictionary until 1826.
Wow.
Words have changed the meaning of them.
Yeah. Okay, let's move forward. Declaration of Independence, 1776, 56 men signed.
Mm-hmm.
They pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. How did those men come out in the end?
For the most part, they put in everything they had. They spent a lot of their own money. They lived and slept the revolution. They didn't become bystanders at all, and many of them were not repaid. So
were they the rich men of the time, or were they normal men?
When you say rich men, there weren't a lot of rich men in America. How George Washington called them the moneyed men. There was very few moneyed men at the time. A lot in Europe, but one of the, forget which founder it was at the Constitutional Convention, said there was fewer than 100 moneyed men in America at the time.
Wow.
So less, and they had a burgeoning middle class, but very few moneyed men, and virtually no poor people. Just huge middle class.
So the majority of the signers would have been middle class men.
A lot of them were, but a lot were businessmen and
So
connected families.
high middle class.
Yeah, and a few really, some of the wealthiest in the colonies at the time.
Right.
Well educated.
And then there was George. I think George Washington, was he the richest man?
But not the richest by money, but one of the richest by land. So he had 25,000 acres all over the Northwest Territories. I think his estate at the time was around 6,000 acres in
Mount Vernon?
Yeah, in and around the area.
Wow. You've got those 56 men. You've got another 39, well, not another 39. You have 39 men that signed the Constitution, 6 duplicates.
Overlapping?
Yes.
Yeah.
Signed both. That nets you out to 89 people. How many? That is what I think most Americans would be considered the founding fathers.
So what I did when I researched, I wanted to know, what is a founding father? Who are they? Yeah. So every historian has a different definition of what a founding father is. For me, it had to be somebody that was on a national stage, not just well known in their state or colony at the time. So it had to be somebody that was either in the Continental Congress or Constitutional Convention or something like that. So I read through all the history, and any time that I thought, okay, this guy might qualify, I put him aside, I wrote his name down, started out with a list of about 185. And then as I researched each one, studied each one, narrowed it down to 150, 155, somewhere in that neighborhood. The work is still in progress, so I haven't got the absolute finished number nailed down. But I have identified at this point 151. And this is the 14 presidents of Congress, the Continental Congress. This is the signers of the Declaration, the signers of the Constitution, are those that attended. Some of them attended the Constitutional Convention but didn't sign. They were also part of it. And then there's a group that was not part of the Constitutional Convention, but did have a lot to do with developing the Bill of Rights in the first Congress. So that's another piece of our documentation that's part of our founding documents.
Right. Now, your books. Let's talk about your books.
Okay.
They are a blend of history and personal biographies.
So what I've done is the common thread through all 4 books, and they say all 4 books, I'm just finishing up the 3rd one, so there's another whole one to go. and the common thread is George Washington. So he's in all 4 of the books, and then it's America's development from his perspective. So he wrote tons of letters. Everything's been preserved, so you can really get a good idea of what was going on almost every week of the founding era, about 50 years. And so then as he comes in contact with a founding father, I pause and do 3 or 4 or 5 pages on that founding father. So you learn who the founding father is and what he did to earn his status.
Well, you've got 150. Are you going to cover 151? Are you going to cover 151 in 4 books?
Yeah, yes, I will.
Wow.
So that in the first book I have 50. Second book I have 43. I'm going to have 44 in this one I'm just finishing up now. And there's a bunch more for the next one.
Are there 1 or 2 people that you have discovered that are not well documented, they're not well known, that should get a lot more recognition than they do?
I have found a few of those. One of them would be Marquis de Lafayette. So he was a founding father. And so there is almost a father and son connection between George Washington and Marquis de Lafayette. So he was a young man when he came here, and he brought generals with him. He brought, I think, 12 in his ship that he privately funded. They came across, landed in America, and he volunteered for no pay to be involved with the revolution, and became a general. And so he didn't have a father, because his father died, I think it was 2 months before he was born, on the battlefield. The Lafayette name goes back hundreds of years in French history, and so it's well known. He was well married, so he's one of the wealthiest individuals in France. And so there was a connection. They were both tall. Both, when they were in a room together, they were heads and shoulders above everybody, so they could have been father and son, and they were the right age to be father and son. And there's connections like that that people just don't know. And it's really interesting, and I've tried to bring a lot of that out in the books.
What have you learned in your research that you consider should be basic knowledge that people just don't know?
Every time I read, I find something new that is not taught anymore. These were amazing men, and their stories are not told anymore. They're labeled as a certain type of person, slave owners and whatever, and for the most part, they weren't. There was a lot of slave owners, but not necessarily the founding fathers. All of them from the North, almost, there are founding fathers that didn't even have slaves.
Yeah.
And, in what they're taught these days is that they were all agnostic.
Talking about what's being taught today.
Yeah.
What's being taught that's probably the furthest from reality?
Just in general, it's the overall, just the innuendo that's being taught about who they were and what their motivations were for setting up the country, and that they all got wealthy doing it. Couldn't be farthest from the truth.
Mm-hmm. Well, as I recall, some of the signers lost their fortunes, lost their lives.
Many of them. Yeah.
So, yeah, they didn't work out well for them.
Right.
Worked out well for us, but not so good for them.
Yeah. 250 years later, it works out just fine. But at the time, and then even when the revolution was over, the time period right after the British left American soil, the British did whatever they could on the national scene to prohibit America from being able to make good money for themselves. So their ships were closed to foreign ports and stuff. They continued to rile up the natives here locally. They continued to occupy forts in the territories. So it didn't just end the way neatly the way people think.
Okay, so there's no neatly tied bow at the end of this.
No. It went through from end of '83 when the British left to the Constitutional Convention, which was 1787, and so that period of time, the economy was terrible. They were free, so there was some positives, but their economy was terrible.
Okay, you've completed 2 books, 1750 to 1776, Irreconcilable Differences.
Right. That's everything that led up to and including the signing of the Declaration. So that's all the irreconcilable differences gets its name from the differences with Great Britain were irreconcilable. Okay. So they decided they needed to become independent, and Britain took that as an act of war.
Then you've got 1776 to 1783, Liberty or Death.
That's all the war years. So there's generals that I cover. I count them as founding fathers because they were part of the national military.
Mm-hmm. Were they paid?
Oh, yeah. Maybe not well, but they were paid.
Okay.
Some didn't. Well, like Washington didn't ever receive any money for it.
Yeah.
Volunteer.
What's the title of your 3rd book?
Dawn of a Nation.
Okay, 1783 till?
1784. It starts actually in January 1784 and goes right up to the Constitutional Convention. it covers the following year, which is the ratification battles, and then it'll end with George Washington being sworn in as the first president. Doesn't cover the first Congress at all.
Wow. Okay. And your fourth book?
Fourth is Passing the Torch.
1788, 89?
Now, that's 1789, straight through till Washington's death in 1799.
So are you ever going to write a book on the War of 1812? Because that's when the British are annoyed and come back.
It's partially covered just because, like Madison I've written a lot about James Madison with the Constitution, and he was, of course, president during the War of 1812. So you have to cover a little bit already, has been. But I will eventually get there.
Okay. Cool.
I don't plan to stop at the 4 books.
Oh, really?
The Founding Fathers are a set group. But then I'm going to introduce the next group is the Guardian Fathers. It's the next generation. It's John Quincy Adams. He wasn't a founding father, but he was heavily involved in politics. So it's who you passed the torch to, that protected the founding documents and did that whole first generation after the founding fathers, and they're the Guardian Fathers. And there's a whole group of those all the way up to Lincoln.
Okay. Book 3 is due out in about 3 months.
It's the manuscript will be done. It's probably 6 months before it gets edited. The pictures get added, and it's actually put in book form.
Any wild time frame for book 4?
I'll start it immediately after that, but it's been taking me 2 to 3 years to knock out a book.
Very good.
This latest one will be about 150,000 words.
So how does it feel? How does Leslie Mironuck feel about how he's progressing, what he's produced?
Well, good. I feel like going into this, my goal was to write the truth. So I factually, it is as close as you're going to get to. I've had a whole panel of people that review the book, content reviewers, and all highly educated people, and some historians. I've got one of the is a teacher of the year by the Missouri Historical Society. So I've got historians that will read the book, and they challenge me on facts, and I prove my points that I found it in this book, and this is what it says, and it's different than current day stuff.
So you've got historians eating a little bit of crow?
Well, yeah, in some cases, yeah, it happens. And history over the years changes depending on the perspective of who's writing it. And I had to de-learn, is that a word? De-learn what I learned in growing up in Canada, and then relearn the new version. So I got to personally reconcile the 2 different kinds of the history.
Les, this has been Wandering North America, and Leslie Mironuck. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And a lot of hard work is going in on a hobby.
Yeah, well, I enjoy it.
Very nice. Hope you've enjoyed this episode. If so, hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell. Share this with your friends, and leave a comment below. Tell us what you think. Thank you for your time.